The northern winds carried bad news. A weary messenger reached Camelot bearing Urien of Gore's seal. Torn banners, splintered lances, and reports of strong picked forces advancing through valleys that had once sworn loyalty. In the letter, the king confessed he had lost half his veteran knights. He begged for supplies, men, and above all, time to reorganize his army. The plea was not addressed to Arthur. It was written to my wife, Morgana, guardian of the mists. Urien knew that if anyone could bend the great king's will, it was Morgana. Morgana presented herself in the throne room with the letter extended between pale fingers. My lord and brother, the north bleeds. King Urien resists beyond his strength. I beg, in the name of the alliance your sacred throne forged, that you send reinforcements at once. Arthur read the lines stained with mud and blood. He looked at Morgana, then Guinevere, then Merlin, as though seeking confirmation in the most familiar faces.
Gore has never bowed to invaders, yet no ally of ours shall fight alone. I will not send only knights. I will carry the crown myself. I ride at dawn.
A murmur swept the hall. Sir Gawain hailed the pledge. Sir Kay urged prudence. But Arthur raised his hand.
Where Britain calls, her king answers, and the round table will march with me.
Morgana inclined her head, a restrained smile on her lips. On the surface, gratitude for her brother's readiness. In her core, the spark of a plan roared. The march was settled, and with it, the first step toward the treachery that would change Britain's course forever. The northern campaign stoked furnaces of glory and blood. Beneath a red and gold banner, Arthur rode in the vanguard, sword raised, breaking living walls of Pictish warriors. The thunder of hooves mixed with the clang of shields, and the king's audacity in battle made Sir Gawain, his battlefield guard, grit his teeth in anxiety. He insisted on fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men, making no distinction between noble and soldier. At dusk, the enemy line gave way. The trumpet of victory was already sounding when an archer hidden among the rocks lifted a cold bow. The arrow, thin as a weaver's needle, slipped beneath the pauldron and lodged in the flesh near Arthur's shoulder. It was no ordinary shaft. It was poison. The king staggered yet uttered no cry, and blood began to seep down the armor. Sir Gawain and Sir Kay rushed in, forming a shield wall until the rear could clear the field. His knights decided to withdraw him from battle. Victory would cost too dear if the price were the king's life. They led Arthur back to Gore's castle. A messenger reached the castle first and warned Queen Morgana that her brother was being brought in wounded. So the queen readied her healing chamber for Britain's king. When they brought Arthur in, sweat ran down his face. The arrow remained buried like a stake. She dismissed barons, clerics, and knights, saying she needed to be alone with the king to save his life. By the light of tallow lamps and aromatic resins, Morgana cut the jerkin, snapped the arrow's shaft, and with Avalon's silver tweezers, drew out the head. She saw the arrow had been soaked in a potent venom, yet on examining the wound, she realized the poison could not overcome his defenses. Some powerful magic seemed to shield the king. Frightened for his life and his realm's fate, Arthur asked,
Is there an antidote to this poison? Merlin told me that while I wore Excalibur's scabbard, no wound could kill me. But I do not know if that included poisons.
Everything was clear. The scabbard was protecting Arthur's body from the venom. Morgana had helped forge Excalibur in Avalon, but the scabbard's enchantment was the work of Yvain and Merlin, so she did not know its power. Do not worry, my beloved brother. By fortune the gods have united us, for I know an ancient technique that serves as an antidote to your affliction. Morgana knew no magic was needed, for the scabbard would save Arthur alone. Even so, she washed the wound with wine, lashed Arthur's shoulder with herbs, recited chants in Avalon's tongue, and applied a pale green ointment that fizzed upon the flesh. All of it was mere theater. Arthur, despite his pain, was impressed by Morgana's deft healing ritual and soon began to feel better.
My sister, you have saved my life. Camelot will be eternally grateful to you. From this day, I declare there is no one I trust more than you, my sister. Therefore, I ask you to keep my sacred sword while I recover.
Not even in her dreams had Morgana thought fate would smile so unexpectedly. The moment she discovered Arthur's invincibility, the key to her vengeance lay in her hands. When Arthur's breathing at last settled into healing sleep, Morgana extinguished the final lamp, took up Excalibur's scabbard, and withdrew to her chambers. By the discreet light of a candle, she examined the object. Outwardly, it was nothing more than dark leather, stitched in Avalon fashion. Yet within ran the spell that staunched any drop of blood shed by its bearer. The enchantment was invisible. What set this scabbard apart were the gold rivets, the rampant lion in garnet, and the silver fillets forming Arthur's cross. There, amid the scents of herbs and parchments, the perfect stroke was born. Among the wedding gifts she had given Urien was a ceremonial sword, crafted by the same island hands, accompanied by a sister scabbard, identical in leather yet empty of magic. She need only transplant the royal adornments from one to the other, carefully undo the seams, loosen rivets and gems, reset them on the neutral replica. She would return to her brother a reliquary without power, keeping the true one hidden until she found better use, or the right ally. The king slept, feeling protected by his trust in his sister, while she stitched in the gloom the first thread of the ruin to come. Arthur regained strength within days, a marvel credited to his half-sister's hands. When he asked for sword and scabbard, Morgana knelt before him, presenting them on a silk cloth. The jewels sparkled. The stitching seemed untouched. There was no sign of exchange or spell. Morgana bowed, hiding the satisfied gleam in her eyes. Without the true scabbard, the next serious wound opened in battle should bleed to the end, and vengeance would be fulfilled with no accusation falling upon her. As soon as the shoulder healed, Arthur rode again in the vanguard. He struck picked strongholds north of Caledonia, crushed a Saxon detachment that had crossed Hadrian's Wall, retook 3 sacred hills in just 5 days. Lancelot and Gawain rode at his side. Heralds proclaimed victories so swift they seemed legends born in real time. Morgana counted the moons, awaiting the fatal news. The king has fallen. The blood did not cease. Britain weeps. But the letters brought only praise. Steel cut, yet the king's spirit seemed to cut deeper. Arthur's glory proved to her that her half-brother's destiny surpassed any enchantment, or its absence. In the silence of her tower, Morgana clenched her fists. The scabbard might have lost its power, but the king's brilliance rose from something neither magic, poison, nor iron could extinguish. She understood Camelot's throne would not topple merely through bloodshed in some random field of war. It would need a surer, more deliberate blow, and Morgana knew someone willing to strike it.